better. I brought up mics.
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, guys, let's go. Here we go. Stand by. Okay. Audio check for Mixler. And we're live on Mixler. Audio check for Spreaker. Capital Club Radio, stand by.
You're going to do the jingle, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
This
here-
is a little introduction, so.
Here we go. Stand by. 3, 2.
Broadcasting live from the Pro Business Channel studios in Atlanta, Georgia. It's time for Capital Club Radio. Brought to you by Flock Specialty Finance. Please welcome your host, Chairman and CEO, Michael Flock.
Good morning, and welcome to Capital Club Radio. Today we've got a very interesting guest, Mike Boyle, a man of many skills, many gifts, and in many industries. He's also a rising leader in the debt buying world. He started and built his own debt buying company. He sold it to a larger debt buyer and became an owner and partner in the consolidated, fast-growing company now called Diverse Funding Associates. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
Prior to Diverse, Mike was founder of C&E Acquisitions, a debt buyer focused on asset purchases in the healthcare space. He started the company while he was an account executive at EMC Corporation. At EMC, Mike was selling data center and infrastructure services to hospitals and law firms. Mike developed his knowledge and appreciation for technology while working in sales at Systems Alliance, where he sold technology solutions to the university marketplace. He learned financial analysis skills at Partners First Holdings, where he managed the financial aspect of its outsourcing relationship with FDR, First Data. He also learned something about advertising when he started his career at NB&A, where he managed advertising jobs, including the launch of the Platinum Card. Mike was the first in his family to graduate from college. He got both a bachelor's degree in business administration and marketing and also an MBA in finance from Loyola College in Maryland. Mike, at first blush, you appear to be a man for all seasons with financial, marketing, and technology experience in banking, technology, and finance companies. That's pretty, pardon the pun, it's pretty diverse.
Well, it's maybe a jack of all trades, master of none, so kind of a generalist.
Well, sometimes that's important. As a kid, though, what was your aspiration? What did you dream about becoming?
I always wanted. My dad at one point had a trucking company and delivered home heating oil, and I wanted to be in business, and I wanted something with large equipment and trucks. I've always
Trucks. Okay.
Yeah, so real sophisticated.
Okay.
If it was big and made noise, I liked it.
Uh-huh.
So I haven't gotten there yet, and maybe that'll be the next chapter. But my dad is one of 6 kids. My mom one of 8. Everyone in small business in and around our community, which is northeast of Baltimore, a town called Bel Air, Maryland, in Hartford County. So my dad's family largely in the car business. They had for a long time a Buick dealership, now Buick GMC, that just celebrated its 50-year anniversary.
Okay.
And my mom's family, my grandfather was in the logging business, so logging and timber business. And now my uncle and cousin still are active there and own and operate a sawmill. I have another cousin, and he's in the environmental services world, does a lot of land clearing, and it's much more regulated today than back in the day when they were doing it with stormwater runoff issues, et cetera. So the whole forestry industry has really grown and evolved. But yeah, it both sides of my family, all small business and close to home. So it was, I kind of just figured I would do something, and I never really had any grand plan.
So there's some kind of entrepreneurial gene in your family, I guess on both sides of your family.
Entrepreneurial, maybe, a little bit of independence, and that independent streak probably as much as the entrepreneurial streak.
Entrepreneurial plus independence. Well, why didn't you go into one of your parents' or your grandparents' businesses? I mean, because they're already established, and you like trucks, so car dealership. I mean, why didn't you go into your dad's business?
So the car business was family run, and my dad actually was independent. He's now wholesales cars, and he does a lot of work with his brothers, but doesn't work in the family business per se. So when I looked at coming out of school 20 years ago at the family business, there were only so many good jobs in a family-run car business. They were all taken, and by guys that weren't my dad. So it was like, well, this looks like it might be a tough road to hoe.
Right.
And so actually through my high school and college careers, I worked for my mom's brothers at their small hardware store, and that's probably the best job I ever had. I learned more there day to day than
in a small hardware store.
In a small hardware store, hardwood floors.
Okay.
And really a great experience, and learned more life lessons and more practical how to do things there than any other job I've had.
Give our listeners some examples of life lessons in a hardware store.
So the area, it's in Jarrettsville, Maryland. It's called Smith Hardware, and they've been there about 40 years now, and but the area is notorious for hard water, and it's hell on plumbing. So any type of metal pipes, bathroom fixtures, it over time they corrode and fall apart.
Right.
So you typically the way a plumbing guy would come in, someone do-it-yourselfer trying to figure out what he's doing, he would pull apart one part. Well, then he'd break the next part up the line. So usually by the second or third trip, he had finally gotten to a point where he had a clean break and he could start replacing and repairing, but this was an iterative thing.
Okay.
And so what I learned was that not only did you have to look at and figure out what he was holding in his hand, but 2-3 steps up the ladder from that, or further closer to the source, to be able to tell and help him or her through whatever plumbing challenges he was having.
So it was a chain of solutions.
So it was that, and just kind of having an awareness of what that guy or girl was dealing with, in addition to what you were seeing. And as trivial as that sounds, that's certainly something I've tried to bring to whatever career I'm in, and to deal not only with what I've got in front of me, but with what that person on the other side of the table may have, kind of behind the scenes. And so the thinking on your feet, doing that stuff was challenging. It sounds silly, but some of these guys were a little less than capable. So trying to handhold someone and talk him or her through their challenges, and trying to coach the uncoachable at times. Certainly, you can't really tell the guy, "Look, you idiot, do it this way." And so it forced a little diplomacy as well. So believe it or not, the hardware store actually was my first job, and I was there for 8 years, part-time through school.
8 years, wow. In the afternoons?
Afternoons, and my college years, I commuted. It was close enough, and so they were always very flexible with my schedule. And so it was cool, and still go in there. I'm a good customer. My number still works in the computer, so I can check myself out. And a couple of my cousins are there now.
That's cool.
But we looked at and talked about perhaps opening another location, and the one thing that I really didn't like about that grind, and as much as I loved the business, was the retail side, just the hours, and at the end of the day, it's a retail business, and I didn't want to be married to a spot, so I kind of started looking around and got a couple of internships.
You wanted to be independent.
It wasn't so much I enjoyed working with my uncles immensely, and learned a ton from them, and very much consider them mentors, but it really being married to a spot, going and showing up every day, in one particular location.
Confining.
It was, and I did not like the structure and the grind of retail. So,
but it sounds like you learned a couple lessons about you're not just selling metal piping or hardware; it's solutions.
Oh, that, try to get the guy's toilet working again. So, not always elegant.
Right, exactly. So is that how you differentiated the hardware store? Meaning, it wasn't just a commodity,
Well,
plumbing for your toilet. It's how do you actually fix it?
Well, I think it's actually why they're still successful today in the world of Amazon and Home Depot and the big box stores. One, they're a little bit geographically removed, so it's a 15-20 minute drive to get to one of the big boxes. But
Right,
two,
right.
you walk in and someone greets you. What do you need today? They walk you through, they help you, and the level of service that they provide, relative to,
Okay.
walking into a Home Depot, nothing against them, especially since I'm sitting in Atlanta. But kind of a small boutique store, very high service, and again, they're really doing well today, and just completed a big renovation, and so it's been fun to watch.
So what I just picked up on this, though, is that you're recognizing that there's also a relationship.
Without
with
a
the
doubt.
hardware store, and
Without a
people
doubt.
greeting you. So that personal touch, that personal communication.
Without a doubt, and
Makes a
in
difference.
that community, and it's still like this today, although it's grown. Half of the folks who walked through the door you knew by name, or certainly, if you didn't know exactly who they were, you knew kind of who they were, and so very much that sense of community, and a really good area. So it was fun.
That's great. Well, so are there some common denominators, though, from your experiences in some of your first jobs and that back to that hardware store? Meaning you were at MB&A, you managed advertising jobs, and later at Partners First Holdings, you managed, the finances of the outsourcing relationship with First Data. What are there some parallels there? Was it customer relationships? Is it solution selling?
I think communication, which probably permeates, any type of sales campaign or customer service. I'm often told to shut up, and I talk too much and long-winded and those types of things. But and that's only by my friends and sometimes family. So the folks who really know me. But all kidding aside, the communication, I very rarely have ever thought I don't think I've ever felt I'm the smartest guy in the room. But if I kind of feel like it's my job to facilitate, and that's been probably common.
Right.
Is how do we get from point A to point B with a lot of diverse opinions or different opinions often. What's the common goal here, and how can I help person A relate to person V, or vice versa.
Right, and it'd be pretty hard, I think, to sell solutions if you can't communicate. So,
well, even if I can communicate, it can still be really hard to sell.
Right, exactly, exactly.
So, it's interesting. So,
and I guess too, communications is part of marketing, which you learned
without a doubt.
Started at MB&A. What were some of those types of communication lessons?
Those types, it's interesting. When I started in the advertising world. At MB&A, it was very heavy direct mail. So they were early on the whole endorsed marketing concept. So they were very early on. I'm a graduate of Loyola College, the Loyola College Alumni Association. So they worked with Loyola to provide their list, provide something nuanced to their alumni base. And then Loyola enjoyed royalties and a financial component. MB&A had great loyalty, great customer service. And at that point, direct mail and the list management was really the crux of it. So it was a multifaceted marketing campaign. They'd go to Loyola, they'd get their list, and did direct mail based on a bunch of different things. So we were looking at response rates and does the green envelope get a better response than the white one? And so they certainly were doing things at a scale that there was a lot of statistical analysis going on by guys a lot smarter than me. Right. But the other side of it was the outbound call campaigns. That was my first call center exposure as well. Okay. So in the call center, it kind of the key performance measures, all those fun things, and as you well know from your time with debt buyers and collection operations, the call center can be a grind as well. It can be, and the quality of the communication is critical to the outcome. Yep. So, but in marketing, it's a different kind of communications. It's also a message. Did you get involved in designing some of the messages in the advertising? We did. So not necessarily on the creative side. It was more the execution and how do you take, the platinum card was the first time, I guess in the evolution of credit cards in the late 90s, this platinum concept was a new one. And so some of the enhanced benefits, the reward points, all those fun things, the loyalty programs that are everywhere today. MB&A was pretty innovative in bringing that to market. So, from a huge launch for the bank, I don't recall. I think they had about $100 billion in outstanding balances at the time. But this drove another 25 or 30% growth over the next couple of years. It really was a significant undertaking and product launch with a lot of success. And so my role at that time, I was a very junior early in my career.
Right.
But it was just really wild to see, something done at scale. Direct mail campaigns with, blanketing the country effectively.
So we look at communications in a call center, and you need technology for that. That's how you, I guess, acquired your interest and learning in technology.
So technology was. From MBNA, I went to work at a boutique consultancy called First Annapolis. They were a group that was pretty active in the payment card space, so any type of electronic financial transaction.
Right.
They also had an issuer practice and did a lot of consulting work with the bigger banks. Credit cards were much less consolidated then. So everyone had a credit card portfolio. All the regional banks had their relationship accounts and et cetera. Obviously, over the last 15 years, we've seen just drastic consolidation and a real run to the top with all the acquisitions in the portfolio world. But first consultancy, I got into that issuing practice, and so they contributed our group to the formation of a company called Partners First, and that was a credit card bank, and we basically managed Bank of Boston and Bank of Montreal through a subsidiary in Chicago, Harris Bank. Took all of their relationship credit card accounts and put them into a portfolio. So we had about 1 million active accounts, $2 billion in outstandings, and so we did a securitization, and I had no idea what in the heck I was doing at the time, but little did I know I was basically doing some pretty heavy lifting and had access to a pretty cool deal. We funded a $2 billion portfolio, and then ultimately sold it to Wachovia, also here in Atlanta. Their credit card operations were at the time, so over the course of literally 2 years and 3 days, put the company together and then spun it off and sold it. And so it was pretty interesting to go through M&A at that time. It was also a kick in the butt when Partners First got sold. I needed a job, and so that was in 2000. The height of the .com bubble and everything. And there was a group in Baltimore called Advertising.com that had just received a pretty big round of funding and was the wonderkin at the time locally. One of my buddies had gotten a job there. I interviewed and started there the next week. So it was different times and lots of fun, but kind of found myself in the .com world, which was kind of a brave new world to say the least. So.
But you were building up a nice, pardon the pun again, portfolio of skills because you were learning about credit card portfolios, technology, call centers, and then let's fast forward to EMC. There you were selling data center infrastructure services to hospitals and law firms. So now you're beginning to also build a knowledge and experience with the whole healthcare system.
So I wish I had some blueprint or grand plan, and I intended to go do all this stuff. It was a lot more serendipity and kind of luck and whatever along the way, meeting good people and recognizing opportunity. When I did make the shift to EMC, I had kind of been through the .com, and I was with a local Systems Alliance, was a local integrator, and did application development work, and but I didn't have a really blue chip marquee name on my resume. So EMC was probably my first foray into. That was probably my first conscious decision that I wanted to go work for a big name in technology and try to cut my teeth there and see how I fared. So EMC I did go into. I interviewed with them, with Oracle, with HP, and I did go. I wanted a big name in technology and very fortunate and had a great career at EMC. So I'm glad that one worked out.
You call it serendipity, but in reality, when you look at your history, your career history, you are already building experiences in finance and technology and call centers, and it kind of comes together in your years at EMC. You have that entrepreneurial instinct and gene, and I think it sounds like you were able to kind of craft your own kind of career path at EMC.
EMC was an interesting place. What they its culture, I think culture and people are interesting. And EMC was I've never been a part of an organization that hired so tightly to a culture. And I was sharing with some friends at dinner last night that I could walk into a sales meeting with a group of the sales guys in Baltimore, Maryland, Atlanta, Georgia, San Diego, California, Chicago, Illinois, and we were headquartered in Boston. So aside from them all being Red Sox fans, you know, that was what made them a little different.
Right.
But almost to a person, it felt like I was in the same room. They hired a lot of young, aggressive folks like me, and there were a lot of ex-athletes there, and they did not encumber you with a lot of very little marketing support actually, and it really was the strongest sales culture I've ever been a part of, and that permeated all aspects of the organization. So, you know, from a compensation perspective, if you were successful, they paid you well. From a competitive perspective, if you were in a fight against HP or someone on a large deal, you could get executive involvement from the technical side, from the corporate side. You know, they used to say we turn the company upside down. You know, bring all the resources down to the guys in the field. And there was not a lot of corporate bureaucracy when I was there. I mean, you could pick up the phone and call anyone. So I had a great experience at EMC, and the culture there really was one of, it was a sales-led culture, do what's right for the customer, and they, in many of my instances, the company always did right, and was a great group to work for.
And it also sounds like they gave you some freedom as an account executive to kind of manage your territory the way you thought was best for your clients. And
absolutely, they had their way of doing it, and if you were hitting numbers and successful, there was, you know, if you put up numbers consistently and were exceeding goals, then you had a lot of autonomy. So I think if, you know, when we're struggling, there was certainly some structure there and some proven methodologies that they used. But if you were successful in your role and your territory was performing where they thought it should be, you had a lot of freedom.
So with all those great things about EMC, the culture, the autonomy, the fun that you were having, why did you start, while you were working there, C&E acquisition? So we had a friend in the friend of the family who was a collection attorney, and my brother was actually involved at the time. And so it was in 2005. I had just gotten married, just started a new job at EMC, and my brother was very adamant. Come on, we got to start something. We got to do something. And candidly, from an ambition and entrepreneurism, he had just come back from. He went to Penn State, spent a couple of years at J.P. Morgan on Wall Street, and then come back to Maryland. And Patrick really was the one who wanted to get this thing going. And so, you know, I said, I just started a new job. I've got a new wife. Like, this is not the time. And he said, when are we going to do it? So. Excuse me, we had that a friend of the family who's a collection attorney, and Patrick said, look, you know, this gentleman seems to do okay. You know, he works pretty, you know, loose schedule. Maybe there's something to this. So this gentleman did kind of guide us through our first debt purchase. He was a state buyer locally, and said, you know, hey, go out and do it somewhere else. He made a couple of introductions, helped us get our first portfolio, find someone to service it, and that was in early 2005. So fast forward to 2008, and that's when I guess I started working with my current partners in 06. And you know, the buys get a little bigger, a little bit different strategies, not necessarily a local legal model in one jurisdiction. We were buying national portfolios of HSBC at the time, albeit relatively small ones. And so it really, you know, kind of, again, not by design, but just by opportunity and necessity. You know, we kind of grew the operations, then we grew the financing capacity, then we grew the, you know, kind of. So you were buying HSBC, but also I thought that I think some of your first portfolios were in the healthcare space, in hospitals, right?
They were. We early on.
And why did you choose that?
So when I was in technology, I covered, by the time I left, I had 7 accounts, and they were law firms or litigation support companies and hospitals. And doesn't really sound a whole lot alike, but there were actually a lot of similarities. So one was the whole privacy issue, and really understanding, patient data or client data.
Right.
Very much both protected classes of data. So the privacy and integrity issues that were there.
Right.
Two, healthcare kind of vital, and everyone needs their health information. In the technology industry, Hurricane Katrina and the devastation that happened in New Orleans was really kind of a seminal moment where the tide turned and hospitals got it. So you've had all these technology companies trying to sell bedside documentation and computerized physician order entry for forever.
Okay.
And folks were kind of, halfway along or implementing little bits and pieces. Well, when you had a wholesale destruction like that and all these patchwork systems were at varying stages of maturity, and none of them had redundancy or some of the business continuity that really they required, it really was kind of a kick in the butt to that industry. And so you saw much more adoption after that, which was a great time to be selling hardware to support that. So with healthcare, and similarly, the legal world, big business litigation, I will go to my grave saying we care a hell of a lot more about our money than we do our health. Because ironically, the legal world and those folks had invested in all the DR and business continuity and much more mature in their systems than healthcare was. So anyway, I kind of straddled the two. I had a book of, small book of some key accounts and really had a lot of fun there.
And so then when did you become completely independent from EMC? And then is that when you also then partnered with Diverse?
So we, so I came out of EMC officially in 2012. I've been working with my partners at Diverse, Dan Mendez, Larry Shavi, Neil Walsh, since 2006.
They had invested with you in these portfolios?
We had co-invested, and Dan was really running the servicing operation at that time. So to varying degrees, we have been working together since 2006. In 2008, we raised our first outside money together, and then in 2012...
Was that before the crash?
That was kind of in the midst of it. So so that capital supplied us through the crash, and in hindsight, I would have loved to raise a hell of a lot more and really double down. And that was a good time to make hay, but we were pretty conservative with how we had grown it. We've seen a lot of guys, and one of the reasons we enjoy our financing with your group is the elasticity. We've seen a lot of guys really, you go out, raise money, they're under pressure to produce returns, and they start making bad buys just to put money to work. And that's something that I'd like to think we've had the discipline to avoid.
Yeah, that's obviously critical in this industry. So what is it about Diverse and their team and their culture that kind of attracted you? I mean, obviously they had money initially. That was critical to the relationship. But beyond that, for you to give up your independence, and we started out this interview talking about your entrepreneurial genes in your family and the fact that you like to be independent, but then when you sold C&E to Diverse, you're giving up some independence, aren't you? And how does that gel?
It didn't feel that way, and I'd like to think it was an example of 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 = 5 or 6. So among the partnership, Dan is our CEO and our majority owner, and really in my career a unique and talented guy. I mean, a top 5 guy that I've ever had the pleasure of working with and for. And so Dan, I think he makes all of us better. And so, I guess balancing that independence with a little bit of security of having some smart guys around you.
Being part of a bigger team.
Being part of the bigger team. And certainly Larry and Neil, also really talented guys in their own right. And, to Dan's credit, as the company has grown, really he's turned over a lot of the trust, and really empowered Larry, Neil, myself to do our various roles. So the partnership works, not because we're all the same, our skill sets sets, I think, are pretty complementary.
Right.
Larry and I do a lot of the talking and dealing with the outside stuff. Neil and Dan more the operators. And so recognizing that other guys have other skills and other passions that aren't necessarily the same, but certainly complementary to mine. And if a couple of those guys happen to be a hell of a lot smarter than you, that doesn't hurt either. So it's been a good run, and the one thing, back to your earlier comment about communication, the one thing that I enjoy, we are always treated like partners, and that really comes from Dan.
Right.
So it's free to say, and behind closed doors, we don't necessarily have to agree. And we can be candid, we can be direct, and I think that's what makes it work. And once we make a collective decision, then we live with it. Some of them have been good. We've had a couple of stupid ones, but
have there been any moments though with this journey with Diverse, with Dan, Larry, and the team there, that you worried that you weren't going to succeed and that you could fail?
No, never a failure, just with the ebbs and flows in our industry, you see what the returns can look like when life is good.
Right.
And certainly maybe some frustration there when life is bad.
Right.
And
but you started this thing in the middle of the crash, which is kind of gutsy.
Well, I guess we started the.
But maybe
the
smart.
And we formalized it. I guess we had been at it for a little while, and certainly had some of the key components of the working relationship down. But it was really looking for that financing in '08, in the middle of the crash, that was the genesis of C&E. And so it was recognizing an opportunity. I would say we're probably a little contrarian. And when everyone else is running for the exits, you should probably be looking around to see what they're we can pick through. So that and again, not divine strategy, just we like to go where others don't.
But initially, your focus, you were in healthcare, hospital systems. You did buy an HSBC portfolio early on, but healthcare was really your focus at C&E, and now at Diverse, that's not as much of a. So tell our listeners your outlook for healthcare and why that seems to be taking longer to develop as a debt buying segment.
Yeah, so Diverse being the parent company, and we buy all of our consumer assets and consumer debts through Diverse. We go to market as C&E Acquisition Group in the healthcare market. So two distinct entities, two sources of financing, and C&E really hones its message, and the reverse sale, I'll call it, to the hospital to earn their trust and be able to transact business with them. It's a little bit unique. I've never worked so hard in my career to give money away. But when we go to the average hospital CFO and say, hey, we'll buy your pool of outstanding receivables, I can cut you a check for $1 million tomorrow. And they look at you and say, well, why would I do that? So it's an interesting time, and I think our evolution, certainly at the national level, you can't have any debate at a national level that doesn't include some component of healthcare. And pragmatically, what I think and what I've seen over the last several years, and what it means to Main Street USA, are higher deductibles. And so for a long time, we've had hospitals who have absolutely optimized and spent lots of money on revenue cycle management. And at the end of the day, what that really means is they've optimized themselves to get paid by the big third parties. That can be Blue Cross, that can be Medicare, that can be Medicaid. Every dollar, every innovation, every piece of technology was to streamline those payment processes and enhance that revenue cycle. What they didn't do, or didn't do well in many cases, and I'm being a little critical here, and this is based on experience, but hospitals didn't really focus on the patient element. All of their money was coming from the big third-party payers, to the extent that they were collecting copays and deductibles from the actual patient in the building. It was the cherry on top of the whipped cream on top of the hot fudge to make the sundae, and very incremental to their overall picture. Well, in the midst of all this, with the Affordable Care Act, I've heard it called the Unaffordable Deductible Act, and it's really pushed a lot of that first, be it $3,000 to $5,000 a year of medical expense onto the individual consumer. So indirectly, it forced the hospital now to go collect that first $3,000 to $5,000 of medical care from the consumer. the last decade, they've been focused on the big third-party payers.
Right.
They haven't been doing scoring models. They haven't been, effectively, they're now banks. They're extending credit,
Right.
Not necessarily credit, but it's a fee-for-service offering. And they have no clue the credit quality of the person who walks through the door.
Right.
So we've seen a lot of variation in different hospitals as to how sophisticated they are when Mike Boyle walks through the door or Michael Flock walks in
Right.
with pre-authorization. So you're there for a service. My daughter this was several years ago, but we walk in and my kids have all had issues with ear infections. So I think we've been through 5 or 6 sets of tubes among the 3 kids. They've typically been done at a surgical center, no problem. Well, one year my daughter was getting her 2nd or 3rd set. Surgical center had a pipe burst. The place was closed down, so we had to go to the hospital.
Right.
So we walk into the hospital. I got my 2-year-old there. We're the first appointment because she's young. She hasn't eaten. Mom's upset because she hasn't eaten. I'm upset because I'm putting my kid on the operating table at 7 o'clock in the morning. And so we go check in, and they look at me and they say, "It'll be $387." And I said, "Okay, no problem." And they said, "No, it'll be $387. Send me the bill like you always do." "No, sir, it'll be $387. Cash, check, or credit card. She isn't going back there unless you pay now."
Right.
Okay, here's my credit card. So, but not only was that, and that was St. Joseph's Medical Center in Towson, Maryland, but they pre-authorized my card. Our insurance coverage, determined what our facility eligibility was and all the charges.
Right.
And actually a pretty early adopter to be able to do that. So they no longer were in the credit business, they were in the pay-to-play business.
Right.
And pretty rigid, right out of the gate there. So I offer that as an example of how hospitals now are really understanding what's going to be due from the patient and having that conversation up front.
Right.
I still think we have a long way to go. Comparison shopping is a joke. And meaning, healthcare, I needed a prescription for my daughter. At Walmart, it was $6. At CVS next to my office, it was $86.
Right.
And for the same thing. And until I think there's more transparency, I think we're going to struggle with this a little bit. But from a healthcare perspective, normal business practices don't yet apply, I think, because there are so many different intermediaries in between you as a doctor and me as a patient.
But what's interesting, Mike, about this conversation with you is that you are searching in your mind for solutions to patient care. Just as when you were at the hardware store as a kid, you're not just selling pipes, you were selling a solution, how to fix your toilet.
Yep.
Now with you're in hospital systems, you're trying to marry, I think, a debt buying solution on how it can help in their management of the whole patient care process.
So the other indirect outcome of all this is a lot of the hospitals are struggling financially, and so we're seeing some consolidation, we're seeing bankruptcies, we're seeing lots of carnage in the healthcare provider space, and so what we offer at the end of the day is liquidity and money. So you're sitting on assets that are not being managed well today. We'll buy those from you, release them from you, and give you an infusion of liquidity.
Yep.
We'll cut you a check for $1 million. Go invest in that point of care system that you can do that validation. And we often tell CFOs, look, we'd love to work ourselves out of a job with you over the next 3 to 4 years.
Yep.
Give us the opportunity, let us inject some capital into your organization and work us out, get more sophisticated, buy the systems you need. So, where we are successful, those are often the use of funds, are those front-end systems, insurance verification, et cetera.
Right. So wrapping things up, what's your outlook for diverse in the industry, and as you craft the vision with your partners, how does the future look for your company and for you personally?
So we're bullish on the industry, and we feel that the regulatory environment is more favorable today. I think it overcorrected and was due for a correction, but I think through 2016 it really was restrictive, and today I think it's more appropriate. We see some barriers to entry. Not just anyone can start being a debt buyer. The licensing and bonding requirements now to do so at a national level are really have some teeth. So we like it. We feel that consumer credit is back to record highs.
Yep.
The economy slows down. There's going to be purchasing opportunities. At the end of the day, we feel our job is to provide liquidity back into that system, and that's kind of fun to, philosophically how we rationalize this and feel good about it. And so with a correction, we see opportunity for purchasing. We collect, and compliance and consumer friendliness are two key priorities of ours. We want to be very good guys in what is often looked at as an ugly business, and that's really a key strategy to our collection is treating consumers regardless of their situation, like real people with real problems, and how do we help them out of those problems?
Right.
And that serves us well.
Right.
So we're bullish. We like it. The one challenge that we have is the consolidation, just in the banking world. So much of consumer credit is tied to so few issuers, and particularly on the card side.
But now there's online lending, so doesn't that provide a new channel of credit?
It does, and that's certainly been an area that we've been doing some exploring.
Right.
And although exciting and although growing, it is a neophyte compared to. I mean, it's a cork in the bathtub relative to traditional consumer credit. So from a scale perspective and those things, they're growing, they're exciting, and it's certainly some innovative models out there that we like. But from a scale perspective, the big banks, you aren't going to get away from them anytime soon.
Right. Well, Mike, you certainly have a great past. In your future, you've got at least another, 20, 30 years of entrepreneurial endeavors in your future. How do you want to be remembered, though? I mean, you're a single father. You got 3 wonderful kids.
Yep.
You've built a wonderful business. You've got some great partners. What do you want to be remembered for?
So no, my kids, I think, are I look at them, and that's certainly, regardless of anything that I've done, without a doubt, my biggest point of pride. And you want to make my day. Tell me something nice about my kids. And my oldest Kinley is in 7th grade, starting to look at high schools. My middle one, Mikey, is 10 years old. He went to a field trip yesterday to the Naval Academy, and pretty gifted at this point. Seems to be a pretty talented athlete.
Yep.
And then my youngest, Delaney, is 7, and she is the life of the party. She's got more personality in that little body than they should give out, and anyone should be allowed to have. So, I don't, how to be remembered, that's a tough one. As long as those 3 people speak well about their dad, I think I would have been successful.
Well, thanks, Mike, for your time today. You've got a wonderful story, actually a diverse, pardon the pun, career, combining finance, technology, sales, and culminating today in a significant leadership role in one of the fastest growing debt buyers in our industry. And in fact, when I look back at your career so far, and you look at the skill sets necessary to be successful in debt buying, it's finance, technology, and sales, all of which you've had. They all intersect. And these are critical ingredients for any executive in underwriting, raising capital, analyzing data, systems, and, of course, selling your brand with creditors and capital sources. You've developed all these skills, and I compliment and congratulate you on your achievements. Are there any kind of parting words of wisdom for our listeners here as we, again, navigate these exciting times in the debt buying industry?
No, I certainly thank you for listening, and certainly appreciate Flock's partnership. I guess if I didn't give the disclaimer, we are a client, so we appreciate your support of our growth, and the team that supports us. You, Greg, Damon, John, and team, and you can't. No one does anything alone, so we appreciate that support, and appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So just glad to be here, and thanks for having me.
Well, Mike, thank you for sharing your lessons learned over your couple decades here in your career. And I think the other common denominator I want to underscore is you've talked about relationships and how important they are, whether it was at the hardware store and now at Diverse. And you clearly have demonstrated how that can grow your business and be very fulfilling personally. So
it's that has served me well, and I'll leave you with this. My grandfather, the car guy, was one of his most consistent sayings was never judge a man until you've walked a mile in his moccasins. Well, we don't have too many Indians around us, but so I don't know where he got the moccasins, but he always had empathy. And the other thing at his funeral, I looked around and most of the folks in that room I had known my entire life, and I was fortunate enough, I was 36 when he died. But, the value of the relationship, he did not turn friends over. He and my grandmother were married for 58 or 62 years or something, and that relationship piece is it. And so I take a lot of pride in, have the same friends and I don't know, I guess I'm not real transient in that way, so I'll credit that one to my grandfather.
Well, those are very wise words indeed. In fact, with lessons maybe for some of our politicians today. Don't judge anybody until you've walked in their moccasins. So.
Exactly. You want to get me going on that?
Let's end here.
All right. Well, you have a great day, and thank you, Michael.
Mike, thank you so much for your friendship and your business.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right. Bye.
Thank you for joining Michael Clark and his guests on the Capital Club Radio Show. For